This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
We cannot handpick which emotions we do and don't want to feel. If we numb or ignore some of them, we create distance from all of them. Feeling disconnected and numb to our emotions, life can also lose a sense of vitality and zest. In cutting out feeling vulnerable, we have also sacrificed feeling so much joy, peace, and goodness. Valeria interviews Dr. Pauline Yeghnazar Peck. She is a licensed psychologist in California and New York with a private practice in Santa Barbara. She specializes in working with the children of immigrants to navigate their relationships with parents, spouses, children, by understanding their background, breaking cultural trauma patterns, and integrating themselves to become fuller and freer versions of themselves. Meet Dr. Pauline at therapywithpauline.com. Here's the interview with Dr. Pauline Yeghnazar Peck.
In your own words, who is Pauline Yeghnazar Peck?
I am somebody who tries to bless others in the ways that I have been blessed and in the specific talents and strengths that I have and that I'm discovering.
Do you have any spiritual belief systems, views, ideas about yourself in life?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe first and foremost that I'm both unique and exactly like everybody else. I'm unique in that I believe everybody has a specific purpose. I believe everybody has a specific calling. I believe everybody has a particular story that is unfolding. But I also believe that I am exactly like everyone else. You know, we're inherently worthy, deserving of love, longing to love and be loved, in need of connection and wanting to be of service. And so I think that's my spiritual beliefs, is that we all are unique and we're all the same, and everybody has something to offer, and we're deeply, deeply connected. So it's less about roles and it's far more about understanding that connection and that in this version, I might be the giver, but in another version, I very much could have been the receiver. And so it's a humbling view. It's a positive view of life. I also believe that we're a part of nature, and just like nature, the acorn knows that it's just built to unfold into that tree. It doesn't have to will itself. It doesn't have to try and strive and manage. It just becomes the tree because the cells in it know that's where we're going. I truly believe that each of us are on a path of unfolding that is deeply part of who we are. And it's less about making it happen and more about kind of getting out of the way of the natural process of becoming.
When you say being unique and at the same time the same, so it goes back to the paradox, which is what life ultimately is. In a way, I know I go deeper into these conversations a lot of times, but I will stop here before it just get out of control on that. I love what you said about nature, right? That we are nature too, unfolding. And what really caught my attention within the comment he made about nature and the unfolding of life as it does, and not getting out of the way. So how do we learn to do that? Because it seems that we have free will to choose and do things, go against life even. It feels that way. But talk to me for a moment about this idea of getting out of the way and letting life, letting ourselves become who we are supposed to become.
Yeah, I think there are a number of different ways. And I want to acknowledge first that I believe that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I know that's not the first time you've heard that, but in that, I think that we, in many ways, we can bump up against our humanness often. And I think one way that we stay out of the way is by acknowledging the humanness and the ways in which our humanness shows up. And everyone shows up a little bit differently. You know, I am not someone who naturally is inclined to surrender. You know, I'm more of a fighter, a doer, a giver. And so
yeah, tell me about it.
it's like that's so inherent. And yet I know that that's my humanness. And I know that I don't have to, one of the mantras I continuously use with myself and clients is balancing effort and ease. And I learned that kind of from the yoga world, because when I was doing yoga and getting trained to be certified, I would really want to get into poses. And if you know anything about the body, is that the more that you want to get into a stretch or into a pose, the more tension, the more pressure, the more prone to injury you are. And you actually have to let it unfold, because you don't want to overstretch. You don't want to overdo the body, because there's this way that it pulls back. And so that practice physically really helped me to kind of see that not everything has to be gotten in this direct, straight ahead, all force kind of way. That surrender and time off and rest and reflection, that these are essential ways for me, and probably for many people. For me, I'm able to kind of get out of the way, because if I do just what is automatic, my humanness is to do it and do it big and do it a lot and do it all at once. And that's not going to be the case. So it's about knowing our humanness and then finding ways to balance that, and to find practices, particularly embodied practices. I mean, things like exercise or movement, yoga, meditation, time to sit and journal, being in nature. These are ways that I feel I come back to my spiritual core, and I come back to moments where I'm able to see, where am I trying to make something happen, and where do I need to bring some softness and some surrender. And one other part about doing that kind of reflection is that we are able to see patterns. There have been so many times where I've been focused on doing one thing, and I just get these little, a friend says something to me and someone else says something else, and I get recommended a book, and and I used to just ignore those things. And now I say, if it happens more than once, I've really got to pay attention, because, I think it's Oprah who says this very well. She says, at first the universe will whisper, and then it'll throw a brick upside your head, And I love that, because I think if we don't have enough time to reflect, and we don't somehow, move beyond the humanness, which is get out of the everyday and have these moments of pause, of stillness, of kind of transcendence, then we're not open to, and we don't oftentimes notice the patterns, the whisperings of things that are saying, this is your path. This is what's right. This is the next step. And so we can't follow the unfolding if I think we're so busy, caught in the day-to-day, that we just we're not open to those levels. That it's like the radio station, you're not operating at that frequency, so you're not hearing the message that's coming through.
It's so true, though. As you speak, I'm just thinking about, kind of reflecting, really. It's almost like images in the mind showing me where I'm doing exactly that, kind of not going beyond my humanness. In a way, I love the way you say that, because I have been reflecting about going beyond the mind. But then today, for some reason, it's funny you say that, because I have been thinking about going before the mind, or before humanness, which means being a spirit being. If it is a space which feels like, in a way, or maybe it's not even a feeling of thy spirit being, thy spiritual person, not even a person, right? Spiritual being. So interesting that you said that, because I have been, reflecting, contemplating this idea of not being caught up within the world of humanness and the mind all the time, using more for functional things. Like speaking now, it's really, I try not to come from a place of, let's say, learned space where I know everything and I have everything programmed, ready to, all the answers to give or the questions to ask. But it just be here and attentive to this moment, being present to what is happening. Use the sound of your voice and the way you speak about these things that resonate deeply with the intellect. And I wonder a lot of times, why am I so interested in these things? So it might be that space of spirit being. What a fascinating journey or experience this is. How did you come to these understandings, Pauline, to this timeless wisdom that you speak of?
Well, I don't know if I have arrived.
Yeah, right. Not a place.
I will just say that. I mean, I think that in many ways it's through mistakes, through trial and error. I think that there's no way to know about, being spirit without really, like I said, bumping up against humanity. And it's, when people hear others speak about these spiritual things, I think sometimes we can feel like we other them, like, oh, that person, they must live in a very different world and they must, occupy a very different space. And I want to normalize and say, no, I have my own daily struggles, right? I'm a mom, I'm pregnant with my second child, I have business, life is hectic and it's busy. And so I think one thing that I have learned from making mistakes and, oftentimes adding to my own suffering is to have a tremendous amount of grace for myself and to recognize, like, I am really on a path of learning. Like you said, it's not about ending up somewhere and knowing, and then that becomes a place you can, put up the lawn chair and take out a cold drink and just, relax. Is like, it's having grace with ourselves. It's like, I'm learning about this because I notice that when I'm operating from a place of just thinking from my mind, just doing with my body, that I actually miss out on so much joy and so much meaning that is present in my life, not because I need things to be different, but exactly as it is right now. I think that I've had moments of kind of tremendous pain or confusion or loss or things not working out and having disappointment. And I think that it's in the painful moments that I think you have a choice to kind of find it within yourself, right? When the external is not working, you can look in and say, okay, there has to be more, it has to be more than just what I do, the degrees I get. My mom died 14 years ago. And I remember that was such a critical point for me. It was like, I was so young, I was in my early 20s and, just had started my first grad school experience. And I had all these things, and it almost felt like I had taken education and this path of knowing as a way to buffer and protect myself from pain. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. And so I think that when we are rocked, when our world is flipped upside down, when we are, in that tight place and we are hurting, I think that's when, there is some choice. Again, not everybody does it then, but there's choice to say, is there something else? Is there another inner wisdom when my body can't go on? My mind doesn't see a way out of this. Is there something else that I possess, something else that I'm connected to that actually is a wellspring of hope, of positivity, of resilience, of beauty, of joy? And I tapped into that through some of the hardest days of my mom being sick and the aftermath of it. And from there, I knew it's like, okay, what we see is not everything that there is, and there are these deeper things that are at play. And if I can tap into that, then in some ways I don't have to always. It's not such a limited and small existence anymore. And so I think it just began a path of openness and curiosity. And like I said, I am still actively on it, because it's a new day, so it's a new challenge, it's a new perspective, and then you have to remember what you learned, and that's years ago, and say, oh yes, I've been here before. Let's do it differently than we're trying right now.
You are a psychologist, so my question is, what was the inspiration and intention to become a psychologist that specializes in the field of children of immigrants in mental health? I would love to know more about that, although I already read about it a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Iran, or I was born in Iran, and I moved to the U.S. and grew up in the U.S. And I'm Armenian in terms of my ethnicity. And so everybody, I think, even as a psychologist, I got caught in this, is everybody thinks the way they grew up is just the way it was.
Yeah.
And I think
it
takes a while to realize, I had, again, the uniqueness, but also the connection to everybody else, And there was just this kind of growing up here that I always was straddling different worlds, right? I was straddling different cultural norms. There was stuff going on in my family. There was a way to be, especially as the eldest daughter, that didn't fit when I was out in the world, mostly in white spaces, and I was acting different ways. And phenotypically, physically, I passed for being white or born here. And so it wasn't like I was dark skinned or had a very different name that would really highlight that I'm different in some ways. And so oftentimes it was an even more confusing experience, because it was like I had all of these different ways that I could be, and I could understand myself, and I could interact with others. And the rules were continuously changing, depending on what the cultural context was. And as I went off to college, and it was the first time, I was kind of on my own. It was the first time I was really seeing my family more objectively, rather than just, this is the way it was for everybody. It was the first time that I was also struggling to understand my emotions, understand my emotional world. And I just felt kind of lost, like, what are some of these feelings? And what do I do with this? And when I would talk to other people, especially people who had been born here or from other families that were not immigrant families, a lot of people had gotten some of this instruction and guidance in their families. And I thought, I got none of this in my family. This is so foreign to me. Like, we have mental health. Like, my family was very much, my parents were pastors, and they still do a lot of spiritual work out in the world. So there was definitely the spiritual realm and the physical realm, but the emotional realm was kind of like everywhere but nowhere at once.
Right,
it was like,
right.
you're feeling that way. It's a stomach ache. Have some tea. It wasn't a lot of discussion around, that might be an anxious feeling, or are you feeling, what's the difference between disappointment and rejection? It was like those, sometimes even when I was doing therapy in Farsi or in English or in Armenian, I wouldn't have the words for these emotions, because some of them don't quite exist in the same way that we have them in English. So as I kind of graduated from college and went on to my first degree, I was studying more and more about race and culture and ethnicity. These topics always engaged me, because I was beginning to see that my individual experience had a name, had some theories around it, had frameworks. People would study this. And even as I made a decision to become a psychologist and start the long road for training for that, I was noticing that so many of these conversations were actually missing from what I was reading. It was like I was not seeing, it was like, this is how to do therapy. And I would always ask, like, for whom? Like, who? Who is the client here? And this is what a healthy relationship looks like. And I thought, again, for whom? Like, let's be really curious about what kinds of ideals and norms are being standardized as the right way, rather than noticing that therapy, psychology, there's a particular Western lens from which we view these things. And so, as I finished my, early training through school and was seeing many, many college students, I got to work with thousands of the children of immigrants. And I can't tell you how many times someone would say, I know this is unhealthy, but I also feel so guilty because of this, that, or I'm having such a hard time taking care of myself because I've seen my parents work night and day to make ends meet, and they're still doing that. And I thought, okay, I am resonating with this. This is something. This is an experience. This is a real way of engaging with mental health that's not being talked about. And seeing the sheer volume of people that I saw over, I want to thousands and thousands and thousands over my 10 plus years of training and being licensed and doing, ridiculous hours to qualify for things. I think because of the sheer volume of it, it wasn't one or two. It was like, wow, this is an experience that many children of immigrants have around mental health, around relationships, around self-care, around, being able to, like I said, straddle those different cultural worlds. And it wasn't really until I had my son, my first son, who's now 2, that I just had kind of an awakening. There's something about having a child that kind of, I like to say, it is such a big, beautiful, gift and a balm. It just kind of, it blows everything up, and then you can see everything clearly. It's like life will never be the same. And I just thought, someone asked me, what is your ideal person that you want to work with, that you want to serve? And I just kind of almost looked in the mirror and said, like, me from years ago, me up and having to kind of figure it all out on my own. It was so confusing, and there was so much shame that almost I needed that support. I remember my first therapeutic experience. I felt so much shame in doing it. It was a secret for my family. And even though the therapist was wonderful, I felt like many times he completely missed the nuances of my particular family, and that an immigrant family operates differently. And so I have different challenges. And I thought, that's where I think I'm going to make the most impact. And so I really kind of honed in on working with the children of immigrants to be the gaps, to fill in the gaps of what I think many of us don't get from our families, and many of us then have the responsibility of doing as adults. And so I work with all adults, really navigating how to break cycles, right? How to look at your culture and say, what do I want to take from it? What do I want to fix? What do I want to just completely disregard and say that's going to stop with me, this generation? It's not going to be passed on even through my life. And to do that requires kind of having an intimate understanding of this, like the subtleties of it, and realizing that mental health is not just a universal thing that you can say. Relationships is not universal. We have to be able to place it in the full holistic culture of somebody, because that's the only way that what we're working with is going to actually have an impact on their lives, if it's appropriate and if it speaks to the truth of what they're experiencing. So that's kind of, I came to this kind of like through my own journey and not even knowing, and having worked and realized, what is it that makes me so excited to talk about? It's with my girlfriends when we're talking about the interactions we see with our parents and our kids, and noticing like, that happened to me. It's like those are the conversations I was coming alive, and I thought, this is where I'm called to be.
Everything you say, this background of who you have become, it makes so much sense to me, because it's coming from the place of deep knowing oneself and the desire to continue to know what makes you who you are. And I love the way you talk about mental health, that actually cannot generalize mental health. That's the first time I hear that way. So from your perspective, from the place you are today, how would you define mental health?
I'll give an abstract answer, and I describe it as flexibility. I think, and this is
Yeah.
so appropriate to the children of immigrants. I describe it as flexibility, but I will also say it's flexibility while also being grounded. Because the children of immigrants do a lot of adaptation, right? You learn in what settings. I could immediately go from, speaking with like a very kind voice to somebody that's older than me in my family to immediately going into another setting, having a different voice and saying, I'm here to present. It was like a completely different switch that I didn't even have to consciously make. I knew how to be flexible because it was part of my surviving in a place where I needed different set of rules and norms and skills. But adaptation alone disconnects us, because then you're thinking, where is my authentic self? Where are the places where I feel like I can just exist? I'm not just looking at how to adapt. And so it has to be balanced with a groundedness. And I see groundedness as connected to your deeper values, because the values are going to be the compass. It's going to be I have two metaphors for values. One is the compass that will help you lead you in the midst, no matter how far off track you are. It will let you know which way is up, down, left, and right, and as well as the lighthouse. So in the midst of the storm, you might not know exactly where you are, but the lighthouse gives you a general direction, and it gives you hope, and you kind of cling to that and you move toward that, and that your path will become enlightened as you move toward that. And so I think that when we are flexible, it allows us to adapt, because life needs that. Constantly, the second you have it all figured out, it's changing again. And I know that very, very much, even more so now, having children, because they're constantly changing. So, and there's a sense of, but how do I stay grounded so that I can, and I give this metaphor as well for the children of immigrants. I say, you act differently when you go on vacation to France or to Italy or to Paraguay than you do here in California. And yet, is there a part of that you are always you? Is there a genuine part of you that comes along, even if you might be eating different foods, operating in different ways, trying different languages? And we see mental health in that way, your ability to adapt and respond in an effective way, given the situation, to not cling on to the past, but to be open to newness, to be, it's almost like bending rather than breaking each time there's a shift. And yet, can you do that in a place that doesn't feel totally disconnected from yourself? You don't know who you are, like you're playing a role. Can you have also a groundedness in your own value system and who the essence of you is? Can that also be balanced with the flexibility? So that's kind of how I see mental health. And I think that working with the children of immigrants, they do great with the flexibility piece. They struggle with the groundedness.
So you keep going back to balance. In the same time, paradox is just being open to life and to ourselves through the change, but at the same time knowing who we are. And you talk about values. That also makes a lot of sense to me, although I don't use those words. But values to me would translate into spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding, and all that. Going as deep as I can go with that. So for you, what are your values? What would that translate into?
Yeah, I mean, it's something as expected is changing from time to time. But I think one of my deep values is courage. I go back to courage again and again. There have been so many points in my life where I've been afraid. I've been, doubtful, and I've done it anyway. And there is this deep value in being courageous. Even, obviously the definition of courage is doing it even if you're afraid. And so I think that I do value like a certain boldness and a certain courage that is intertwined with deep compassion and heart. It's not just being bold and reckless. It's being courageous because this is the right thing to do. It's being courageous because this is the thing that will bring, like I was saying, the most blessing. It's courageous because this is vulnerable and it's going to grow you. And so I am somebody that I think truly values that where there's that fork in the road and you can do the easier thing that would be more comfortable, or you can do the slightly harder thing that would be, you know, okay, this would be good though. It would be good for me and it would be good for others. It would take me being a learner again. It would take me being humble. It would take me asking for support. I think I really value leaning on the courage piece, as well as to be, really honest. I am somebody who values honesty. And I think I'm continuously, I say, be honest, but be kind. And I'm always wanting to bring the balance of, especially with my clinical work, is like sometimes, just like all of us, I probably go to my own therapist and she sees things so clearly. But if you just say, oh, well, this is what's happening and you should do, I mean, that person they're not ready for that and it's going to hurt the relationship. So it's like, how do we balance honesty with also kindness and real respect for the other person, as this other person who, just like you, at times in their life is going to be not seeing certain things until they're ready to see them in their own time and in their own kind of divine intervention and divine path. And there's this, again, you're right, the balance part is so much of the part of the way that I work. Is I really truly value honesty, but I'm always going back to, and is it kind? Because it's got to be both. It's got to be both honest and kind, because that's the way it's going to be received. And I think that showcases that another true value of mine is relationships, that I really value, the work that it takes, but also the meaning that you get and the sense of purpose and connection. I think I've looking back at my life, I've made a lot of my decisions around my relationships, and I don't regret that, because that's been my value, and my lighthouse has been investing in me within the context of somebody else, because that's where we thrive. You can be known and have all these accomplishments and everything, but if you don't feel deeply connected to other people, there's a certain sense of alienation, and it's almost like, for me, a certain wastedness of all of that. And I want to make sure that I'm in deep relationship with other people, as well as still in relationship with myself, right? So are there ways I'm treating myself the way that I would treat a close friend? And if not, where do I need to make some adjustments? So I would say those are the three that are really coming to mind, even though, there's so many others that I could list. I think it's important not to just say, oh, all of them, but to really say, these are a few things that are guiding me in this season of my life, is a sense of courage, a sense of honesty, supported by kindness, and also to be deeply invested in my relationships.
You're beautiful, Pauline. Really beautiful. Yeah, it comes to me like that's the image, which is not an image really. It's just this feeling of beauty. And that's what I see in nature, in a flower. It's just naturally beautiful and it's just there beautifully. Thank you so much for being that. As a human being, using words and intention, it's truly beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
It becomes emotional. I don't know why. It touches the heart, right? So when you say courage, what came to me when I think about this conditioned mind and body, I think about trust. I know you didn't mention trust, but I kind of heard that in a way, almost underneath your words, that there's a trust in yourself as life itself, or perhaps even in the spiritual realm. But am I hearing something that it's true in a way, or it's just me kind of projecting my own understandings, my own ideas?
No, I think that that's absolutely true. And I think that trust, I was just writing something about confidence, and it's confidence and trust, and, learning to listen to that voice and engage with it in a courageous way. I think all of it comes back to not a sense of, I know exactly, what I'm going to do and how it's going to look, but it's, I'm giving myself the grace to figure it out as I go, that I can ask for support when I need it, that I will be loved even if I don't succeed. And I think many of these things, working with, lots of clients who have all sorts of childhood wounds and childhood traumas, I think it's an experience that has to be experienced. It's a truth that has to be experienced by us first before we're able to keep experiencing it on our own. And I will say my grandmother gave me that. My grandmother gave me, when I think of unconditional love and I think of unconditional support, she was that woman. I never heard her say a bad thing about anybody, even people who had done really horrible things to her. She was continuously encouraging. She was always interested in what I was doing. And I felt like if I got an A plus or if I failed the test and came crying to her, it would not matter. She would love me because of who I am to her. She would love me because I am her flesh and blood. And it is who she is to love others. And that love is not something that I ever had to worry about. And, I know now, as I've processed a lot of my own childhood and what has given me some of this boldness that I family tells stories of even being a young child and saying certain things and doing certain things. And it's because, the first 4 years of my life and, arguably the first 5 years are most important for a lot of things that will carry through in our lifetimes. Not that they're ever not things you can work through or work on, but they set the foundation. My grandmother was very active in my life for the first, 4 or 5 years of my life. And that, I think, made all of the difference because in my body, I knew what it was like for somebody to love me without me having to earn it, and somebody to love me no matter what it was that I was doing. The most harsh thing she ever said to me, and she would say sometimes is, "Oh, you did that." And it would be maybe I hit my sister or I took something I wasn't supposed to. And she would look at me and just say, "Oh, you did that." And it would make me just kind of question like, "Oh, she's loving me like this. Like I've got to be intentional about what I do, and I have power in my actions." But I never felt it was from a punitive place or from a place that, I felt like I was going to be nervous that she would take it away. And so I think that it's easy to think of a lot of these things as, confidence or trust or spirituality. These things are innately a part of us. And I believe in hearing stories and working with people for over a decade now that these are things we have to experience first. It's in us. We have the innate capacity for these things, trusting ourselves, knowing what our inner voice sounds like, identifying the wisdom within us. But if you have no model of that in a relationship, because humans learn best in relationship. We don't learn anything outside of relationship. It has to be in relationship. I learned a lot of this early on from my grandmother, and I don't think I had really made that connection until she passed away last year. And in processing the guilt, the grief around that, I've realized, oh my goodness, that was the relationship in which I became emboldened, and I was able to really fully experience another person loving me for exactly as I was. And I think that has stayed with me, and it's something that I've consciously cultivated and supported through my life actions. We become more and more courageous the more we act courageously. Like you want the thing, do the thing, do the thing you want. You want to be more honest, start being honest. You want to be kinder, start doing things that are kind. You will begin to cultivate that. So I don't want to say our actions don't matter, but I think that the relationship that I had with her really set the imprint in my nervous system in that first primal, primitive and foundational relationship, that this is something I can be. This is an area that I can lean into without fear of what it will turn into.
With that story, which is not a story to you, it's the relationship, the lessons we learn with relationships, or it's a relationship to, relating to. It makes me think about, that's exactly what therapists do, your
Yes.
job. It's like a grandmother, the loving grandmother that loves you no matter what, and no judgments, just accepting, open, right? It's almost like a mirror. It can be that. Why not?
Yes, absolutely. I've never thought of it that way. But yes, it's the non-judgment. It's the support. It's I want you to be making the best choices for you, but only because I don't want you to suffer. not because you have to make me proud or I would be upset with you. It's not about me. It's I want the best for you. And I'm here, regardless of what happened. And I'm there to compassionately be there with you. It's so, so, so powerful. And you're right. That's the entirety of therapy is based on the relationship.
Yeah. So we're almost at the end, and I have so many other notes here, but I wanted to mention the guide that you have written. It's titled A Translation Guide for Communicating with Your Immigrant Parents. That's a free guide available on your website. And the guide, I looked at it, it has, what caught my attention was the scenarios 1, 2, and 3. So I'd love to hear briefly about them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The guide is, again, you see the tip of the iceberg, not what went on underneath the iceberg, to get to that last step is, in my high school years, especially, oh my goodness, communicating with my parents was so difficult. Like I could say this is orange, they would say it's blue. They would say it's blue. We'd go back and forth because again, we were not actually living in the same world. We were having very, very different experiences in the same place, as is always happening. So there's generational pieces, but huge cultural differences. The way they grew up, the way I grew up, and I was so reactive. Because I didn't know how else to be. So it was like they would say this, I would have my knee-jerk reaction, and then all of a sudden we would be doing this dance that we would do, and we would be left feeling so hurt at the end. And I loved my parents, and I would feel so guilty when it didn't go well, but I was also so angry at them. Like I was just like, understand me, And so this guy came from, I started beginning to take various, I call them translations, but I started realizing that, I'll give you a concrete example. This loving grandma of mine, one time I walked into their house and she looked at me, she said, "Oh, you've gained weight." And I just kind of held it together, went to the bathroom and burst in tears. I must have been 13 years old. And I was like, oh my gosh, like she just commented on my weight. It's such a taboo thing to do in Western cultures, like to say that a, young woman entering puberty has gained weight is like the worst thing that could happen. And I remember, it must have been my mom who came in and said, honey, in grandma's culture, think about it. She grew up on a farm. She grew up somewhat poor, and food is a way of saying you've been well. And when you eat, she's saying, I'm noticing you. She doesn't have the same context of weight as being thin is what you should be in Western culture. She's thinking, are you fed? Are you not eating because you're stressed? Are you in need of support? It was like she's saying you got a haircut. She wasn't saying it looks bad.
Right.
So she was saying, you gained weight. It was an observation.
Yeah.
And I didn't, obviously I was maybe, 13 or 14 at most, but throughout my work with these, thousands of children of immigrants, there were so many times where they would bring in a scenario and say, my mom said this. And I would think back to a certain translation and think from their cultural perspective, what are they actually saying? What is the translation? And again, language, just like I was using traveling to different countries, different foods, different norms, different languages. I thought language is one way. They are in a different worldview and a different cultural perspective. But if we, as the children of immigrants who occupy two different, at least, sometimes multiple different cultural, positions, if we can learn some of those translations, we'll be able to communicate better with them. And more so, I think what helped me throughout my kind of early high school years until, really when I was probably in my late 20s, maybe 30s, was realizing that I've got to have some real values driven behaviors that I can feel good about, regardless of what my parents are saying or doing. And what I mean by that is like, I've got to come away from the interaction, even if it didn't go well, feeling good about my part in it. So these two kind of came together to provide this guide for people. And it's just 3 scenarios. One of them is the guilt trip, which many, cultures use, don't come, that's fine. We're gonna die and we won't see you get married. And, there's just laying on the guilt that I think any child of an immigrant knows that guilt can be a very, very primary strategy in that. The other one was comparison, continuous comparison to your siblings, to others, to, this person's second cousin's daughter's son is now going to Harvard. What are you doing? And the last one of just, what is I'm blanking on the last one.
Oh,
the
yeah.
guilt
Unsolicited advice.
Yes,
Right.
let me just tell you what's going on. And I thought these are examples that I've heard. There's many, many, many others I could have included, but this was just a taster of this framework of, can we translate it knowing that if my parent loves me, I'm not talking abuse situations, I'm not talking if a parent is actively harming you in some way. I'm saying a parent who loves you but is giving unsolicited advice. Can we think, what does it mean from their cultural viewpoint? And if we can translate it, and if we compare that to how do you want to show up? And in the guide, I have a clear value system of showing up with empathy, with responsiveness, not reactivity, and with curiosity. And so if we compare it with that, what are some possible responses that you might have? And there's this real kind of hope that you could, create some change in the dynamic, even if just by you responding differently, because just like a dance, if you step this way, the other person all of a sudden is like, oh, wait, we're not doing the usual dance. And they might be thrown off a little bit. But I always want to kind of have the caveat of, but it does not mean that you do this, you're going to change your parents. You got to let go of the fact that you're not going to change your parents. You don't have control over their behavior. These are things that ultimately you're doing. So at the end of the day, you can say, I think I understood the meaning of what they were saying, not just the words from my perspective. I also think I treated that interaction with the kind of values, the kindness, the compassion, the curiosity that I would give anybody else that weren't my parents, that weren't triggering me. And so those two together, there's hope in creating a different dynamic, but it does not mean you're going to change the other person. Most parents are not going to change. And so the guide is there to say, these are very common scenarios. This is what many parents are actually meaning. These are some possible responses. And just to begin to give people a sense that these things that they see as very maybe just part of their family is actually happening more broadly. 1 in 4, people in the United States is a child of an immigrant. So 25% of the population is having this experience in some way, shape, and form. And I just was hoping the guide, especially it being free, was something that I could kind of put out there in a larger scale to have people feel validated, but have some concrete frameworks and skills to be able to do it differently.
We're almost at the end. I do have a few more questions for you. But before that, Pauline, I want to mention the 2 quotes that I found on your website. You say, translation is the art of existing in 2 worlds at once. And you said that already, you mentioned that before about having different experiences. We're all experiencing this reality differently. Beautiful quote. And then you also said, this was by Nelson Mandela, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to a man in his language, that goes to his heart.
Yeah.
That's deep, though, because it goes back to love, doesn't it, and compassion. So speaking in the language that will touch their hearts, not just, it won't go to their minds only. It will stop in the heart, to touch the heart. And that I can say that here today with this interview, how many times did you touch my heart? And you're probably that's the intention of your work, but you're not trying to do that. That's interesting to see how also universal that can be. When you talk about love and other things that we have been saying, it's just, you went straight to the heart. So beautiful. Emotions and feelings, do you attribute them to the mental health domain, or could they be messages, signs from the spiritual realm?
Oh, it's both.
Yes, paradox, balance.
There's no way we are both. So it's going to be both. There's so many times you could even take that as emotions as well as body sensations, because emotions live in the body. And so you have many times, I'm taking a year-long hypnosis class, and even just today, this morning, we were talking about, a surface level issue that is actually symbolic of something deeper. and you don't have conscious awareness of what it is. And so it might come out as a superficial problem or even a physical problem. And so, he was talking about tightness in the jaw, TMJ, or some other physical thing that somebody will come in to get hypnosis around, and it's actually indicative of something else that they had no conscious awareness of. So I really do say, the way that I describe the emotions is I have kind of a biological, and then I have more of a abstract and spiritual way of saying it. Emotions are electrochemical. So there's an electrical impulse. There's literally that activation potential that is moving through the neuron, and boom, on the other side of the neuron, you are releasing certain, chemicals that then are moving through your body. And it takes about 6 seconds, pure emotion, to be metabolized by the body. So there is this actual physical charge, that kind of electricity that is moving through you. I always say, if you plug in your brain, it's going to light up a 40-watt light bulb, because there's actually energy, not just in a woo-woo way, but physical electric energy that is moving through you at all times. And then there's a chemical reaction. But I also say that the emotions are the messenger systems of our body, and they're communicating so much more to us. And when we don't listen to the emotions, oftentimes they turn into body sensations. I mean, they're linked to body sensations, but they turn into, I will say, issues with the body, pains in the body, certain things that are unexplainable by even, going to various doctors and trying to figure it out. It could be fatigue. It could be times that I had a client who had lost her voice for 6 months, literally could not speak for 6 months. And it was a trauma that was coming up to be addressed. And she had no conscious awareness of it. So she's going to doctor after doctor after doctor, finally landed in therapy with me, and we're doing art therapy because we can't talk. So there's just so many ways in which the emotions are the messengers. And when we repress our emotions because we've been through difficult things, when we don't even know how to speak the language of that emotional system, and so we're unaware, and the message is coming through, and we're not checking the mail, all of these things can lead to the emotional system not running in this clear way where it's able to give us feedback and we take it. Now, emotions are not facts, right? You could have an emotion and it could be based on the way you perceived something. It could not have been someone else. There could be all reasons why the emotional system gets messy, but we want the system to come through. We want the message to come through so that we can then evaluate it and then figure out how much of it we want to act on and how much of it we want to wait on. And so part of that discernment is also what comes into play with emotional intelligence and emotional competency. But I do believe there's the kind of electrochemical thing that's happening, but that emotions are really messengers, and they have crucial information for us. And we don't have to immediately take the message and run with it, right? My 2-year-old has a lot of emotions, right? And that he wants ice cream and he's angry, he's not getting ice cream. But doesn't I'm going to immediately give him ice cream. But I want to hear him, because if I hear him and I say, you really want this, and I can see how frustrated you are, I'm going to be able to have him feel seen and validated. That's going to calm him. From that place, the two of us can collaborate on actually getting him a meal that would be nutritious. And if we can do that with ourselves, to recognize that these emotions are just information, that we don't have to be afraid of them, and there are ways we can handle them with more ease and with more effectiveness, then they're like consultants. They consult with us, they give us things, they give us messages, sometimes about the environment, sometimes about deep spiritual matters, but they give us information, and we don't want to miss out on that information, because it helps us navigate life decisions that much better if we have the full picture. And so I do believe they're communicating a variety of things, and it's up to, first we have to listen to them to then be able to differentiate what is noise and what is truly coming from, the depths of our inner wisdom and needs to be listened to.
Yes, that's another powerful message. Listening to emotions instead of trying to escape them or numb them, right? We tend to be afraid of our own emotions. You probably have heard Advaita Vedanta. This is a Hindu philosophy in spiritual philosophy. And I remember Swami, he said something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about disturbances. Only a disturbed mind can perceive disturbances anywhere. So in order to be disturbed, we have to be already disturbed. The mind is
Yeah.
already. That was a very humbling. Yeah, it was very humble, really, to hear that. Like, oh, wow, so my mind is disturbed. And I thought I had been working on it for all this time, and it's still disturbed because I feel disturbed by things. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
profound. Thank you so much again for this conversation today, for everything that you're doing in such a beautiful way, passing on this wisdom, timeless wisdom, I call it, not just to your clients, but also your family, your children, yourself, of course. It goes back to you, and then your family. It's just the most beautiful thing. I really appreciate you and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. I really appreciate that. I want to just make one last mention of because I'm just a solo practitioner in private practice and I balance family and my work, I'm not able to serve that many people individually. And so this past year, I actually started a program. It's called the Culture and Connection Transformation Program. And it's basically everything I wish I learned, as well as all of these tools that over the years of working with clients, I've seen, oh, this is what helps. And it's for particularly the daughters of immigrants, because I think there's some gendered pieces there. And that's the experience I know most intimately. And so this is a 1-month program. It's not therapy, but I'm obviously a psychologist, and it's very well backed by therapy and the therapy that I provide. But it's like an educational program, and it's a high touch program. We have several sessions, lots of tools and exercises, and I really guide you through in that month an intensive learning all the things that I wish I had learned, which is what are the connections to the past in my family? What are the things that I kind of am bringing with me from my family line? What are the ways in which I can get better education around emotions? So what's my emotional education, and how can I learn a different way for dealing with the emotional system so that I can better take care of myself? And then we lastly focus on relationships and giving the tools to really be thriving in relationships, not just with self but with others. And so this is a program I'm offering now, and they can get it, from I'll have to put that up on my website, but it's on my Instagram at Pauline the Psychologist is my Instagram handle. And I have the application there for a free call to learn about it. And I've already just seen, women that I would never be able to therapeutically work with, from across the US and, other countries, learning from this. And I'm just struck by how much their stories are my stories and my story is their story, and how much, it just feels very right to be doing this, because I keep hearing, oh my gosh, yes, this is what I needed, or I've never heard somebody else have that exact same thing. That's what happens to me. So for those daughters of immigrants listening, that's a program that they can definitely take advantage of. And it'll be this month in October 2022 will be the last kind of month that I'm offering it, because then I'll be going on maternity leave. But I hope to bring it back up when I'm back from maternity leave early in 2023. And so just wanted to put that out there too, because that's been such a labor of love and a source of healing. When you're able to put out there something you needed, it's like you're able to give that gift to your young adolescent self. It's like I'm saying to that reactive, confused young me, I've got you, and I understand you, and you make sense, and everything you're going through is gonna make sense one day, and it's actually gonna help you do what you do with kindness, with love, with clarity. So hang in there, So it feels beautiful to be giving to others, but it also feels good to be kind of closing that chapter as well and giving back to myself something that I truly didn't even know I needed, but I for years was on the quest to find.
Yeah, how wonderful that sounds. So I'll have the link on your podcast profile too.
Wonderful,
and
thank you.
Your website, Pauline, how can we find more information about you and your products and your services beyond Instagram?
Of course, my website is www.therapywithpauline.com, and it's getting a beautiful, fresh makeover as we speak. And so you might see it in its different iterations, but that's where you can find various blog posts and information about me and what I offer.
Wonderful. I'll have the link of the website and also your program will be there. Thank you so much
Thank
again
you so much
for your presence here today. And we'll talk soon, Pauline. Bye for now, my dear.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Dr. Pauline Yeghnazar Peck and her work, please visit therapywithpauline.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.